What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Very excited about today's video. We're going to be talking about the Steelers' new and hopefully improved offensive line and setting some realistic expectations for this group up front. Joining me today is offensive line guru and Bleacher Report's very own Brandon Thorn. I'll link his Substack Trench Warfare down in the description of the video, but I highly recommend this one for you guys because he's taught me a lot about what it's like to look for when it comes to offensive line play. So, Brandon, I really appreciate you jumping on here, man, to talk some ball. How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Yeah, happy to do this, and it's always good connecting with you, at the combine and whatnot. And yeah, so this is good to talk some Steelers ball.
Yeah, so let's start out with Steelers first round pick Troy Fautanu, someone that I
Yeah.
really didn't expect to be there for them when they based on where they were picking in the draft. I was pretty bullish on him as a prospect just because of the athleticism, the quick, heavy hands, and his experience just playing in that like really vertical pass heavy system in Washington. I was reading your scouting report for Bleacher Report. I know you liked him a decent amount as well, but what about his game, stood out for you during the process?
Yeah. So sorry about that. Had an alarm
You
go
good?
off. Yeah, I mean, you kind of pointed it out there, really. I mean, I think it's his athletic ability and functional athletic ability and movement skills on the field as a run blocker and pass protection. You saw that recovering. I thought he was really good in terms of body control, balance, getting back, in front of rushers after counter moves, things like that. Just kind of hallmarks of high level pass protection. And then the hands that you mentioned as well. Thought he had maybe the best hands in the entire draft, just in terms of speed, power, and just overall kind of dexterity. Recovering and resetting his hands in place on guys quickly. So he was just really good in that regard. And then as a run blocker, I think that's really like what he does best is just he's a dynamic run blocker, somebody you could feature in the run game. And now the Steelers have two of those guys, a tackle, which is pretty special. I think when you look across the NFL, not a lot of teams have two tackles that you really can feature in the run game.
Right.
And so that's pretty exciting. But yeah, he was one of the I think my 4 or 5 highest graded guys in a loaded class. So I really liked him. And yeah, you also touched on the scheme, and he was kind of counted on to play on an island a lot. Pass first scheme, which is kind of rare in college football
Right.
to some degree. Most of these guys come from a heavy run scheme, like another rookie you guys have, but another couple rookies you guys have. But yeah, so that kind of made him unique and fun to watch. So you got to see him play on an island a lot, and he did well. So, and the Pac-12 had really good edge rushers as well. So, yeah, there's a lot to like about his profile.
Yeah, I think with Fautanu, man, like the athleticism, like he does some stuff out there on the perimeter that I feel like very few guys can get away with. Like the way his aggressive play style, the way he can, quick set or jump set on guys. And you mentioned the
Mhm.
recovery ability. I know, like I mentioned earlier, like kind of in the intro, like that's something that you really like taught me to look for when it comes to like offensive linemen is like, can you get yourself out of compromising positions? It's something I talk about, a lot about on the channel, and I feel like he's definitely shown that he can do that stuff. With Pittsburgh bringing over, Andy Weidel from Philly, they've always had a tendency to build through the trenches up there. But, we had a discussion about Broderick Jones at the Combine 2 years ago, I believe, before the Steelers selected him. But I wanted to get your perspective on his rookie season. How do you feel like he acclimated himself to the pro level? And, what's the next step, do you feel like, in his development?
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously played a new position last year, so that has to be taken into
Right.
account. And it was I think the most difficult part about it for him was pass protection. And that just starts from the ground up, overall footwork, getting to the right spots, playing with the right like relationship to rushers. He opened up too quickly, too often, got beat across his face ugly a few times. Just quick, glaring losses that he had in pass protection. Just footwork not being there. Just not looking comfortable. Just
Hmm.
and I think maybe as the year went on, there was some stability there, but it overall was pretty rough. I thought in pass protection, especially when you isolate him kind of in those one-on-one
Right.
situations, which isn't like too shocking considering moving the positions and also that he wasn't super experienced anyway coming out and also raw, 1 year starter at Georgia and, at a different position. So, but what you did see is, kind of, I think what made him so appealing, and that's with his size and his athletic ability, movement skills, and explosiveness on contact, when he does align a target, it's pretty devastating. And they featured him pretty well last year, as a puller, which was nice to see. You don't see a lot of right tackles in the league pulling. So that was pretty cool. But pulling to the left, kicking out, and then also leading to the right. And just he's just a really good run blocker, kind of natural for him. So that was on display, and I think that'll be on display again this year with the move, assuming he's playing left.
Hmm.
But the pass protection element is what is really going to need to be improved on. And I don't know how quickly that's going to happen, even though he's moving to his college position. For
Right.
him, it's not like he had, 45 starts there or something, so he's probably just going to take a little bit of time regardless. But, I think if this is a heavy run scheme, which it seems like it's going to be, this is a good situation for him to develop in.
Yeah, and you mentioned too, like just some of the quick glaring losses that he had on tape. I mean, those become a little bit more difficult, in my opinion. Me being like more of a quarterbacks guy, like those are a little bit more difficult to overcome on the left side as opposed to the right side because you don't have the vision right from your blind side. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, like you said, the devastating reps that he had as a run blocker definitely give you some, it does offset some of the struggles in pass pro, but I feel like, this is going to be, I always kind of looked at Broderick as kind of a 3-year project anyway. So I'm interested to see like what he looks like, particularly through the preseason, with the move in position. But, with Arthur Smith as the new offensive coordinator, we mentioned, they're going to be really run heavy, lots of outside zone. The pass
That's
game is
key.
going to, yeah, the pass game is going to be moving the launch point. Like when you look around at other NFL offenses, what are some of the more helpful ways that you can, alleviate some of the stress on a team that's it's definitely a rare situation where you've got two really young offensive tackles that are both high draft picks. I mean, I think of Seattle being kind of a similar thing, but like,
Mhm.
what are some of the ways you can alleviate some of the stress off of those two guys?
Well, I mean, I think it starts with just minimizing the quantity of pass protection reps, so being
Hmm.
run first, that's, first and foremost, I think. And the most offensive line friendly schemes in the league, I think, definitely are generally run first, if not run first, definitely balanced.
Hmm.
So in terms of the run pass split, so that's one. And then executing more play action than true drop back, RPOs, being up, in the top 10 or so. Most of the most offensive line friendly schemes are that. And I would qualify Arthur Smith traditionally being a very offensive friendly scheme, heavier personnel as well, extra bodies in there, 6, 7 man protections, things like that. I mean, guys just aren't on islands a lot. They're not pass protecting a lot. Um, and, that's pass protection wise. You can also incorporate, tighter formations. So you just basically clog up, the pass protection lanes, especially for edge rushers.
Right.
And we see, the Shanahan tree teams, do that at a very high level. Andy Reid as well. So yeah, just there's a lot of creative ways you can build in help for offensive tackles in particular and pass protection, whether that be slot receivers, just the presence there, tight ends, just their presence. They don't even have to touch anybody. But again, you can kind of bump on the, bump and release, those sorts of things. Running back chips are, you know, that's debatable whether how helpful those are or not. I
Right.
mean, they can be for sure, but I think that's kind of like a toss up more than anything. But that's another way. So there's lots of different ways, and then depending on the matchup and the opponent, I think that you could do focus that more on one side or the other, and then in the run game, I mean, executing or utilizing, I should say, like a lot of purposeful jet motion to
Hmm.
purposely move linebackers and create hesitancy. That way, if you're running outside zone, and you got to climb to the second level, if that linebacker that you got to climb to is hesitating for a second, you're going to be able to cut him off. Sean McVay is a master at that, and
Right.
among other people, Kyle Shanahan, and so there's a lot of ways that you could do it, and I think the Steelers have a guy that has shown that he could do it, and that's going to be a huge change from what we've seen.
Yep.
from the Steelers' offensive scheme. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, very much so. Hopefully, I'm
yeah.
cautiously optimistic. With Smith, man, like I'm very aware of like some of the pros and cons of his scheme, but I do think that like you said, the just the experience, like having success at the NFL level, is enough for me to at least buy into this being a positive move in the right direction.
At least
But
from an
let's,
offensive line perspective.
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
for
know how the
sure,
pass game concepts and all that. I can't speak to that, but in terms of
yeah.
offensive line and providing them with a good ecosystem, I certainly think that this is a good one. So,
Yeah, and I think too, like something you mentioned too, like just eliminating as many true drop back pass sets. I've been watching a couple like clinics from kind of guys that come from this kind of scheme or scheme adjacent stuff, and they've talked a lot about that. Not only does it reduce the amount of decision making that the quarterback has to make, but it also takes pressure off the offensive line, not having to drop back pass set for 25, 35 reps a game. So but I want to talk a little bit about Zach Frazier from West Virginia. He's a guy that I think has, the makeup of a day one starting caliber player. But, you had a film room on your Substack that I thought was awesome. And I encourage everybody to check that out. But watch the Steelers fans be excited about having him as the guy at the pivot for the future.
yeah, I mean, I see really like a high floor kind of starter here. He just has a well-rounded skill set, a lot of experience, 40 plus starts, I believe, which is kind of, I don't want to say rare, but it's not the norm nowadays. A lot of the times, especially for top 2 or 3 round pick guys,
Sure.
those are usually real talented guys that leave early. So and the benefit of that is you've gotten to see him execute in multiple sorts of schemes against a lot of different opponents, and he's pretty consistent. So that's always nice to see. And I think play strength is really where it starts with Zach Frazier, and I would qualify it definitely as above average, like NFL level play strength, if not very good. Which I think he could work himself into that level in terms of that one trait. Really good competitive toughness, and he's definitely a guy who quarterbacks the line and makes all the calls. And I think as a rookie, he could probably do that. If not right away, he could work himself into that in year one. And yeah, so I mean, he checks a lot of boxes. He's not like the biggest, most physically imposing guy in the world or the most athletic. I would say both of those are fine. He kind of clears the benchmarks you want to see, good enough, sort of. But I think he's very strong. He's technically sound. He's a master with leverage, and he has that wrestling background that certainly translates that a lot of centers have. So he just kind of reminds me of like an NFL version of like a Ben Jones or a David Andrews or somebody like that who starts for 10 years and is solid, dependable, and maybe not like an all pro ceiling, I don't think, but definitely like a top 10 player at his position. I think
Yeah.
he can get there pretty quick.
Yeah, I feel like you get that guy in the second round. I mean, that's great
Yep.
based on the investment that you make. And you mentioned Ben Jones as a guy who Arthur Smith very familiar with from his days in Tennessee.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, like something I really liked about your all's film room was, he did a really good job explaining kind of the wrestling background and how he plays with leverage, just
Mhm.
basing on like he has a good feel for like the way guys are leaning and how to contort his body to make sure that he gets guys to the ground. He's another guy who's like really good finisher. I feel like Fautanu, Jones, and Frazier, all three of those guys really had that all over their tape in terms of, the competitive toughness, but finishing through the whistle. And that's something that every offensive line coach, dreams of, whatever. But, this is a,
Yeah.
a question that I've been asked a lot this offseason, but I wanted to get your take on this because I know you just put out your ranking of your like top 32 offensive lines or whatever. But
Yep.
what's a realistic expectation for the Steelers offensive line this season? Adding this influx of younger players, guys that we've talked about, to establish vets like Isaac Seumalo and James Daniels at the guard positions.
Yeah, I mean, I have them in my rankings at 15th overall. So basically, right in the middle, middle of the pack sort of unit. That's what I would expect going in, give or take 3 or 4 spots, and
Hmm.
either probably lower, I would trend at least initially just because they're so young now and there's new players, new scheme. So maybe I'm a tad high there. I'm a little more optimistic on these guys than maybe some other people. So if you want to have them at 20 or whatever, that's fine. But I think, that's kind of the floor, though. I mean, this is going to be, a slightly below average to solid unit, I think. Kind of worst case, I would assume. And I think they have a potential to work themselves into a fringe top 10, top 12 sort of unit this year. I wouldn't be shocked. And now, a lot of that is contingent on Broderick Jones to me. I think
Right.
he's kind of the linchpin here to make that happen because if you have a guy who is at least solid in pass protection at left tackle, I just feel like that'll be huge, because I'm assuming Fatanu is going to be pretty solid all around, if not a very good run blocker. And everybody, we know what the guards are, and then we just talked about Frazier. So assuming that's how it plays out, I think Broderick Jones is the key. But um, yeah, within this framework, this system, the run first, play action heavy scheme, I feel really good about this offensive line, especially in context of the last few years, what
Yeah.
the Steelers have been. So they're trending in the right direction, and I think it's going to be a pretty solid line.
Yeah, no, like seeing guys like yourself and like some other people that opinions that I respect, putting them in the top half of the NFL and like offensive line play already this summer is like, man, it's been a while. I mean, you have to really go back to, the probably 18 Steelers team, really Ben's last year before he blew out his elbow, where, before, Pouncey and DeCastro kind of, went on. But it's been a while since the Steelers have had an effective
Yeah.
offensive line and a play caller to combine that with. So I'm excited about what it's going to be. And I think that's like the thing that I'm trying to tell people too, like just patience, because you mentioned like there's just a lot of new faces, got guys playing different positions, and a new scheme. And I do expect that there's going to be some rockiness, out of the gate. But I think like by the end of the season, I really do agree that this could be a top 10, top 12 unit. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Daniels. He's entering the last year of his contract, but they did draft Mason McCormick, and it's kind of interesting because they said that they weren't, going to negotiate a new contract with him this offseason. So they're going to let him play out the last year of his deal, which was kind of surprising to me. But why do you think the Steelers liked McCormick's tape? And, I know I think, had like a 4th or 5th round grade on him. What are some things that he would need to show you to convince you that he could become a starter at the NFL level?
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know that I liked his tape relative to some other people, honestly. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people had him like, maybe round 2, round 3 or so. I was more round 5. So I didn't, he had a very significant disparity between his film and then his Shrine Game film and
Right.
his testing. I didn't see a guy who played to that level of testing, which he tested like an elite athlete. And I just didn't see that on his film. I saw a guy who fell off too many blocks, for my liking, especially on the first level against bigger guys, which is kind of hard to find quality competition in South Dakota
Right.
State. But if you do watch enough film, you see some guys who are at least decent. And most of his great blocks, I would say almost all of them were pulling and lining up a guy on the move, which is great. But that's kind of a secondary thing that you would, want. That's not really your primary. And then he had some nice second level blocks on linebackers. But in terms of base blocks, drive blocks, down blocks, I just didn't see a whole lot of really good stuff there. So it's interesting because him on paper is very impressive. He has 55 starts and he's an elite athlete. So, granted, he's older as well, but
Right.
it looks good. It's a nice profile to work with. But I think it's I wish I could see practice and training camp because I feel like you're going to know very quickly kind of which guy is the real guy, the game film guy or the Shrine tape guy when he's having to block Cam Hayward and Keanu Benton. I think you're going to know real quick. So yeah, I guess we'll see. They'll
Yep.
know what they have when you have to block those guys in practice. I don't foresee it going particularly well, but hey, this is a guy you kind of take a swing on, in day 3 in the draft, I guess. So it makes sense that they did it, and it'll be interesting seeing him trying to block those guys, as
Yeah.
Frazier as well. I mean, it's
Yeah.
going to be tough.
Yeah, they're gonna
So
these young guys are gonna get thrown into the gauntlet, man, with the Steelers defensive
with
line.
those two,
It's gonna be a good test for them
not
right
to
out the
mention the
gate.
edge rushers. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, they're going to have all they can handle against this defensive line, which is great. This is what you want.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny you said that about like you're gonna know really quickly because that's something that when I was doing the post draft recaps on here and like going through like my notes on the players that they had drafted, that was something that I said with McCormick was like I think that we will be able to know very quickly if this is a dude that is capable of starting next year. And that sounds crazy because it's like, he's going to have his entire rookie season. Who knows how much he'll play? But I think you'll be able to tell by the preseason, just like, all right, is this guy going to take, 2, 3 years? Is this a dart throw, or is this somebody that we are like actually counting on potentially starting in 2 years? And I think for me, beyond like some of the things that you mentioned, like there were some times where he would get isolated in pass protection, and where you get into third down situations, and like guys that have like two-way goes on him. I didn't think like that was one thing that surprised me with this testing was I didn't feel like he was like laterally in terms of in his pass sets. He didn't look that explosive or fluid to me, so I was a little bit
Yeah,
surprised by that, but.
I
I'm
agree.
hoping that they can
Yeah.
get something worked out with Daniels. The guard market kind of exploding on them is kind of makes it difficult. But we mentioned that Pittsburgh's going to be extremely wide zone heavy in the run game. If you were a scout, say in the Steelers organization, trying to find the right personnel for this system, what are some things that you'd want to see on tape from a prospect that you were scouting? It could just be general stuff or interior, exterior offensive line.
Well, it's a little different for interior, exterior, I guess, but you obviously would want to see them in a similar sort of scheme, or at least executing similar sort of concepts. So you could see things like a zone base block. I mean, that's kind of the foundational element of it. So, say you have a guard, you want to see him execute a base block against a three technique, and how well he can secure that block. Can he create some vertical lateral displacement? Can he hold the point after he creates that displacement and kind of solidify that lane behind him if he's on the front side?
Hmm.
That's kind of the core, I would say, of front side of wide zone. If you're individual, like a solo block, and then front side combo blocks, whether you're in the post or if you're the drive guy. So that depends on alignment and things like that. But basically, not giving up ground, I would say, and holding the point of attack and creating a new line of scrimmage, and doing that consistently. And then, timing and things like that on your releases. If you are, the guy that's running, getting up to the linebacker, what sort of timing are you using? What sort of angles are you using to get to the second level? How fluid are you in those movement skills? That's big, and wide zone. I'd say that's kind of the core of a front side element of it. The base blocks and the combo blocks, and then backside, backside cutoffs. And I
Right.
think that a lot of that is snap timing and footwork, and how well you could get to your aiming points. Rip that backside hand through, utilize that drag hand to secure the lane. It depends on how you're taught, of course, if you're trying to, fully scoop a guy, or if you're just trying to stay square and keep him centered, that sort of thing. But you want to see displacement and control, on the backside of a run block, if not a sheer, just a straight up cutoff. So yeah, I like divvying it up in like front side, backside, elements,
Yeah, that
because
makes
it's kind
sense.
of, yeah, just two different things. But yeah, that's kind of what you look for on wide zone, and it's pretty similar at tackle as well. It's just you're going against different guys, different body types, and things like that. So a little bit different, but yeah, that's kind of what I would look for, front side and backside.
Yeah, that's really good insight. I think too, like you mentioned, the displacement factor of it. I that's one thing that's really been coming up. Like when I've been trying to, just learn more from like kind of this family coaching tree. A lot of these assistant coaches that are doing these clinics are consistently talking about, wide zone, like making sure that you're still getting vertical displacement. Like this is like it is a perimeter run. Like you want to make sure that the defensive has to defend, the entire field, but at the same time, like you're not just trying to go east west, like you're trying to still move the line of scrimmage, create that new line of scrimmage, like you said. So,
That creates the
um,
cutback lanes if you
yep,
create vertical displacement,
you know,
right? That's how the cutback lanes
and
open.
that's
So
where your big plays happen. So I
yeah.
know you're heavily involved with O-line masterminds with Duke Manyweather. Get to see your guys' stuff is pretty cool. And I know you're having conversations with guys around the league, and hearing their perspective. I feel like on your Substack is really insightful for a guy like me. But when you talk to players, like what are some of the things as far as what are the toughest aspects of transitioning to the pros as opposed to playing in college?
I think one of the things that I've heard the most is the mental side of it, and
Hmm.
just having confidence that you're going to be able to execute your assignments against these guys that you've heard of and watched, and kind of been a fan of in some sense for years. Like when you are aligned across from a guy like Von Miller, Aaron Donald, or Myles Garrett, or Chris Jones, or whatever, there's a mental game that you're essentially kind of playing with yourself, and you just need to tell yourself the right things and have confidence, and that comes from time on task, basically practice, being fed the same thing from the coach, having a coach that's consistent, not telling you different things. And, so much of it is how you're prepared, how you prepare individually, how you're prepared basically by the offensive line room, whether that's the coach and the guys around you. Are you equipped with the right information? Did you have enough time to practice the techniques you're being taught? And I would say those things are a big hurdle for guys, depending on where they go, of course, because there's not a lot of technique work being done in the NFL,
Right.
especially for offensive line. It's heavy schematically based. Typically, it's getting the game plan in, and what do you do versus this look, and how are we adjusting? What are our calls? And it's all that kind of stuff primarily. The technique stuff is kind of by the wayside, unless you're
Right.
in a specific situation where like Jeff Stoutland is heavy on technique, or Bill Callahan, or the elite guys who may be a little bit more comfortable with the run game stuff to where they can focus on the technique. But yeah, so I think the mental aspect of it, man, is huge, and just confidence. Because if you don't have confidence as an offensive lineman, it's probably going to be a long day or season or whatever for you. So that's kind of hard for us to gauge on the outside, watching film. But
Hmm.
typically, if a guy's confident, they're going to play well, or at least to the best of their ability, and the chips let them fall where they may. At that point, the guy may just be better than you. But I
Right.
think the confidence level is huge, and it's just something that comes up when I'm on in offensive line masterminds over the last 6 years. Is just guys continually talk about this, and the dynamic of them and the coach, and them and the other guys on the offensive line, and how cohesive that is, and how much they can rely on that. And I think people would be a little bit surprised at just how much of it is a mental aspect as opposed to just purely physical. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's been a big eye opener for me over the years. Just guys
Yeah.
harping on that continually, including the elite guys in the league harping on that as well, because it varies for them as well.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, like you just look around the body types, and like you mentioned some of the names. Like, I mean, we got Hall of Fame pass rushers pretty much everywhere across every position. We're seeing more talent like on the interior defensive line now than we ever have. So, I mean, I feel like that's going to be a transition for a lot of these interior offensive linemen coming up right now. Is the NFL's prioritizing those guys more and more because we've got even more talented players at those spots. So, and I feel like you mentioned a good point. Just like knowing getting yourself almost like psyched up to get ready to go up against these guys that you've watched play on Sundays for however many years, is really important. Last question before I get you out of here, man. The Steelers signed Russell Wilson to be their starting quarterback. You and I had a brief conversation about this, but I wanted to talk a little bit about it just because I think it's relevant to the expectations part of this video. He's had a lot of success over the course of his career, but some of that's tailed off recently in Denver. That playmaking style of quarterback, it leads itself to taking some sacks. He likes to get out of the pocket, things like that, which can make it tough on the offensive line. What are some ways that you think quarterbacks can make life easier on an offensive line, or like tackles in particular in this instance?
Yeah, that's a huge piece of pass protection. Evaluating offensive linemen and pass protection is looking at the quarterback, and
Hmm.
really it comes down to the depth I think that the quarterback is getting in his drop, which is going to change based on the concept. But generally, you don't want a quarterback to be further than 9 yards beyond the line of scrimmage. 9.5. That's kind of the cap. If they're at 9.5 to 10 or plus, it's kind of on them at that point if they get pressure, and
Hmm.
just kind of disregard what happens, especially to the tackle. If they get beat and the quarterback and they're getting beat at 10 yards, just delete that from the offensive lineman's evaluation in a sense, because then it's kind of on the quarterback 9 times out of 10. So guys who drift, too deep in the pocket, that is that's a huge red flag for just conducive offensive line play, offensive execution overall, that's a big red flag. So I would say drifting in the pocket, whether that's too deep or side to side drifting, which Russell Wilson is kind of a king of, to be
Yeah,
honest. He's a big time drifter. He doesn't help the offensive line at all. So just being blunt about that one, that's just kind of obvious when you watch a film. Watch a Broncos film last year. It's
right.
obvious, but yeah. So I mean, ideally, you want a guy like, I mean, the ideal here is Tom Brady. He's probably the best ever. It's getting to a spot as a quarterback and not drifting. Your back foot hits and you're sticking right there and reading the field. And then if need be, you hitch up past the outside pressure and you deliver the ball. So it's very I love the way Nate Tice says this, formerly of the Athletic, now with Yahoo Sports, one of my favorite analysts, but he's a good quarterback guy too. And he always says a guy with zero fat in his footwork.
Yeah,
And that to me just makes a lot of sense. It's very sharp and there's not a lot of wasted movement, whether that's back, side to side, whatever. It's getting to your spot, back foot hitting, and you're decisive. So quarterbacks who are the opposite of that and are kind of moving around and drifting, I think that's a huge red flag. And then when they do get pressure, of course, being able to escape that in some way, having some athletic ability and extend playability always helps to not turn pressures into sacks, which
right.
is tracked. That's a trackable stat that you can look up that is give you a pretty good idea of the quarterbacks that are really good about evading pressure. So I think there's two elements of it really. It's not letting pressures turn into sacks and then just avoiding pressures altogether based on your footwork and the timing
Right.
of when you're delivering the ball.
Yeah, and I think that's key to kind of separate those two things because I feel like the latter part of that, in terms of like the escapability, the things that Wilson can do outside the pocket,
Right. He could do
well,
that.
he can
Yeah.
do that, and he could still,
Yeah.
like, I feel like even in Denver, he slimmed down a little bit last year, looked like he was in better shape. I thought that, you still saw the flashes, even though his athleticism has waned a little bit. You saw the flashes outside the pocket to do that, but I mean that it is what it is. Like we have enough of a sample size over the course of his career, even dating back to Seattle. That just is a negative in his game, and even
Yep.
really good players have those. So it just is what it is.
Right.
It's something they're going to have to minimize that you mentioned too, like drifting, not just like back in the pocket, but you made a good point about East and West too. I feel like for
Hmm.
him specifically, that's an area where I think like his height sometimes comes up to me because like he's looking almost like East and West because he's looking for throwing lanes because he
Windows.
can't
Yeah.
see over the offensive line. So it,
Maybe.
it's
Yeah.
it's going to require, I feel like, judging the offensive line, like setting the expectations for this group is going to require a lot of context and a lot of really detailed film watching and knowing what you're looking at, because there are going to be some times where some of these struggles in pass protection aren't going to be entirely on this group. So that's something that
Right.
I've reiterated to the channel. I just wanted to get your perspective on that. But I know I got to get you out of here. Please tell people, where they can find your work, man.
Yeah, so people could go to trenchwarfare.substack.com and they could get all my pretty much my primary work there. I just came out with an offensive line fantasy draft. That was a lot of fun. Talk about a lot of the best players in the league with Andrew Whitworth and Jeff Schwartz. And then every offseason, I do like a top 75 overall offensive lineman, top 15 at each position. That'll be coming out here in the next couple weeks. And then I do an offensive line almanac that I'm really excited about to do for the second year in a row, which is just basically ranking all 32 units in about a dozen different categories, like money spent, age, collective weight, collective experience. I even use like RAS scores. So just, and then RAS scores based on weight, like a weight adjusted one. So like all kinds of cool stuff that people can use to kind of get an idea of where their offensive line is at relative to the other units in the league. So that'll be coming out. And then Establish the Run has my top 32 rankings that you mentioned. People can go there as well. And then college stuff is Bleacher Report. So all
Yeah.
college scouting reports there.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I really encourage everybody watching this video. Like, if you guys, I know we got a lot of subscribers to this channel that are really, looking to, learn more about the game, and stuff like that. But Brandon is an excellent resource, especially for me. Taught me a lot about offensive line play, and I feel like a lot more comfortable, man, talking about that position after really,
That's
reading a
awesome.
lot of his work. So it's definitely it's worth it, man. Y'all got to make sure y'all do that. But we got to get him out of here. So I appreciate you guys watching. Just on your way out, please make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Make sure to go support Brandon's work, and I will holler at you guys next time. Peace.